All right, welcome to the ABCs of backup generators. Lucky to have Exergy Energy CEO David March with us today. Good afternoon, David.
Thank you, Randall. Good to see you again.
And before we get started, a little housekeeping. We do have everybody on mute who's attending today's LinkedIn Live. Please use the chat function, drop any questions you have in there. And then if we're not able to get to it during the actual LinkedIn Live event today, we'll make sure that we address those questions and get those back to you. So Dave, why are we talking about generators today?
Well, specifically talking about backup generators because the world's kind of ugly out there right now. So if you look back only just a couple of weeks ago when we had the crazy extreme weather, and of course we still have it going on in California, there were millions of people without power during the sort of the holiday season, when of course it was also 4 feet of snow and 10 degrees and things like that. So millions of people without power. And that's just from the weather perspective. I just saw today that another substation got shot up in North Carolina. That took 40,000 people down a couple of weeks ago for 4 or 5 days as well. So the grid is under assault, and assault from climate change, extreme weather, terrorism, a whole variety of things. Outages have increased by 14-fold in the last 10 years, both their frequency and their duration. So if you don't want to be in the dark, you don't want to be cold and hungry, you've got to really take the responsibility of your own resiliency today. So there are so many people out there now saying, hey, I think we need a backup generator. So that's why we decided to have this quick introductory presentation.
Yeah, and when it is important, it's extremely important, and things like this time of season really bring it to top of mind. So, as I'm a business owner and I'm thinking about generators, there's multiple fuels, that are out there. So, what fuels do generators use, and then how do I decide, which one is best for me?
Sure, that's a great question, because traditionally there was only one. Like all generators were basically diesel. Today I'm going to put it into three categories. One is batteries. Get to that one in a second. Now, it's not classically a generator, but there's more and more people pushing, saying, for backup with batteries. Number two is your liquid fuels, and number three is your gaseous fuels. Batteries, interesting, being pushed. Reality on batteries. Now, we're going to speak specifically in commercial and industrial space. It is okay as a backup, but at most it's going to be a couple of hours. So it's just too bloody expensive to have a battery that's going to be big enough to keep you running for a day, several days, weeks on end. And like I said, if you look at, just the shooting up of those substations, people were down for 4 days. It would be millions and millions of dollars to do batteries. So for most commercial and industrial, we don't see batteries as being sort of a viable, backup strategy. On the liquid side, it is vastly dominated 95% of the time with diesel. Sometimes you'll see some gas-powered generators. They are typically going to be either mobiles or home, residential type, because it's easy to go fill up when you fill up your car, and you have, you've got a can of gasoline in your garage or something for your lawnmower. But the vast majority of liquid is going to be diesel. And then that brings us to gaseous, and there's really only two kinds there. It's either natural gas or propane. The preference, of course, is natural gas. Propane is used where the natural gas isn't available, and in general, they have other activities at the site that require propane. So they have a large propane tank, so it makes sense to have the generator as propane. If you don't have, natural gas on site, storing propane, if you're not using it for other things, that just gets pretty bloody expensive. So in general, what you choose is going to be dependent on what is available. So if natural gas is on site, we highly, strongly recommend go with natural gas. The generators are slightly more expensive, but the maintenance is less. The surety is fantastic because the natural gas lines are underground. They're unaffected by weathers and trees and falling down and things like that. So if you can go with natural gas, we strongly recommend that. If you can't, it's not in the area or it's too expensive to bring it to the site, then diesel's the way to go. Diesel's fine, and most of the generators have integrated diesel tanks with them that'll keep you running for typically 24 to 48 hours. Problems with diesel are, one, the maintenance is higher. Number two, it's a little less reliable. The generators are very reliable. But what we've seen with extreme weather, it is now getting super difficult many times to actually deliver fuel. So your tank is half full, you only got 12 hours left, and you put in a call and say, I'm going to need a diesel delivery. They may say, we just can't get there. It's flooded, the trees are down, and things like that. So if your focus is reliability, gas is available, go with natural gas. Otherwise, diesel is going to be basically the play. Historically, 95% of generators sold were diesel. Today, it's more like 60% or so. Most people, moving toward natural gas. And of course, it's a lot cleaner and it's a lot less expensive to operate.
Yeah. So those are the kind of fuels they use. But what are the different types of generators themselves when you get into like the actual components of the generator?
Not so much the components of the generator, it's more like what their applications are in a sense. Now I think on this seminar, we said, hey, it's the ABCs of backup generators, but backup is sort of a broad term. So there are 4 types of generators really out there. There is a backup generator. It is used only in emergency circumstances. The grid goes down, you need that generator. The second one is sort of like the bigger brother of the backup generator, and it's called the backup demand response generator. It's there if the grid goes down and can run, but you can also use it to participate in grid programs like demand response and things like that, and literally make money, from that, depending upon what your electricity contracts and things are. It will run more hours because you're going to be using it for making money rather than just as a backup. Then there are prime power generators. Prime power generators are literally what it says. They are there as your prime source of energy, and they run continuously 24/7. So that's what you're relying on, and they run constantly. And then lastly, and it's not so much a generator, it's more how you use it, is what's called combined heat and power. A combined heat and power plant is a prime generator, but then coupled with heat recovery. So they'll take the exhaust gases, they'll pull the heat off of that and make steam, make hot water, and do things like that. CHP is the most efficient way to go because you're taking both fairly efficient generator, about 40% for most of these, of electricity generation. Then you're taking a lot of that heat and you're using it to, offset what you'd be doing with your boiler and things like that. So those are the 4 of today. We're really just talking about the first 2, what we'll call standard backup and backup plus demand response.
So when you talk about standard backup generators or demand response capable, what are you talking about in terms of cost?
Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to look at that. First, let's take cost by type of generator fuel-wise. So a diesel generator will tend to be less expensive, but the maintenance will be higher and has those issues as well. But typically, a backup only generator, and these are rough numbers, okay, and they're sort of full projects. So this would be sort of turnkey. Backup only will typically be 80 cents to $1 a watt. So if you needed 100 kilowatts, it'd be $100,000, roughly that way. If it is backup plus demand response, it's going to be more in the range of $1 to $1.30 to $1.40 a watt. So again, that 100 kW would be $140,000. You get into prime, that's going to be closer to $1.50 to $2 a watt, fully installed and done. And then CHP has a broad range depending upon all the other equipment, and that'll typically range $2.50 to $5 a watt in general.
So when you look at the different types of generators and the different options I have, I'm assuming that there's that many, there's so much variance because they just have very specific needs and things that people are trying to accomplish with them. So can I mix and match the different types of generators on site for the type of application I have, or is that kind of a no-no?
Yes, but only in one direction. And let me explain what I mean by that. So a backup generator only is both permitted and designed to run a few hours a year. We'll get into more detail on that. So you can't use that for prime power. It'll burn itself out in no time. You can't really use it for demand response either. It doesn't have enough runtime. And always remember, what we're trying, or the generator manufacturer trying to do, is get you the best value possible. So if all you need is backup power when the grid goes out and things like that, it has a whole different play with regard to emissions and things like that. So you tend to not be able to go from low to high, meaning, a backup can handle demand response. No, demand response is not going to handle prime. Prime isn't, that way. You can do it the way going backwards, though. CHP is sort of out of the question because it's so built into the infrastructure with pipe, plumbing and everything else, because it's heating water. You can use a prime generator for demand response and backup. You can use a prime generator for backup only. It's a lot of overkill from a cost perspective. And we said, that backup only is maybe 80 cents a watt. That prime power might be $1.50 watt, maybe twice as expensive. Do you really need it? And that's, partly where that comes into. So you can't mix and match, really.
Yeah, and so it's really important for me to get it right then. As far as when somebody says I need a generator, the natural default is I'm going to go figure out what's the cheapest one, because I don't want to spend money on a generator. And then I might find out down the road I had a different application that I should have been thinking ahead of. And now I got to swap out something I spent money on. So how do I know what's right for me?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is, in whatever you do, if you don't think it through and plan it and do it right, you're going to leave money on the table. So if you buy a prime power generator and you're only using for backup, you left money on the table because you spent too much for the generator. If you buy the backup generator and then somebody comes to you and says, oh, would you like to participate in demand response and make some money on it? You'd go, no, I can't do that because it's not compatible to do that. I leave money on the table, or opportunity on the table. So the first thing you have to figure out is, what are you trying to achieve? I need backup only, or so first start off is I'm looking at backup or I'm looking at prime. Okay, I'm going to run, or CHP. I'm going to run 24/7 on this thing. That puts you on this side. I need backup. That puts you on this side of the game, right? Mm-hmm. And for most companies, backup is what they need, right? The grid is, even though I just dissed the grid and say it's 14 times worse than it was 10 years ago, it's still bloody good, right? So for most companies, and the grid's pretty cheap, literally, it's really quite inexpensive. So for most people, it's really the backup side. The difference then between whether it's backup or backup plus demand response is just essentially, if you have the opportunity to participate in grid services, demand response and things like that, then you're most cases better off going with the demand response generator, because literally the cost of ownership, even though it's more expensive, will be less on a total cost of ownership than just the backup generator itself. So then you just say, okay, how do I determine whether or not I should go backup or backup plus generator? I mean, backup plus demand response. Two pieces to that. One is, are you capital constrained? They are more expensive, so it's going to be more expensive to buy it. If you're capital budget limited, even though the backup with demand response may be a better long-term total cost of ownership deal, If you're capital budget constrained, you may only be able to do that. Now, there's some solutions. We'll talk about that in a moment. The other one is, where are you located? So if you're in a deregulated territory, which about 78% of the population of the United States is, and that's, the East Coast, the West Coast, the whole Chicago area, the deregulated area where they have things like demand response and grid services you can participate in, then you should seriously look at it that way. If you're in regulated areas, it's very, very difficult to participate in grid programs. There's not a lot available. It's spotty. And what I mean by it's spotty, it may be down to a city level saying this city or this municipality has demand response programs and things, but your neighbors, 10 miles away may not. So you need to understand that. But choosing it is, do I need prime? No, it's backup. Am I in deregulated? Best to go backup with demand response capability. I'm in regulated. You're probably going to lean just toward backup.
So once I've got that isolated and I figure out this is the type of generator I need, then how do I go about deciding the size? Because there's another opportunity to go wrong.
Yeah, so size is, again, quite tricky. First is, what is it you need to back up? We're off the prime side here, okay? Yeah. Prime's going to run everything, right? So what do you need to back up? And again, classically, and let's take it from a residential. We don't do residential business, but take it from a residential side. If the power goes out, you kind of look at it and you go, what do I really need? Well, I need my refrigerator. I might need, I need a few outlets so I can charge my phone and the internet and be able to run my furnace, but I don't really care if I'm sort of sitting in the dark as long as I have my phone and my refrigerator and my stove, right? You don't need a whole lot. In the commercial setting, it depends upon what you're trying to achieve and what you're doing. So let's take one example would be, I'm a retail store in an area, in a mall or something like that. The power goes out. Not everybody's going to have a backup generator that's going to be able to run the entire store. The customers are going to leave and go home because they can't continue shopping or something like that. So you're going to need the bare minimum. So it's going to be exit lighting, fire pumps, things like that. Conversely, you're a healthcare facility, you're a hospital, or let's take nursing homes or something like that. The power goes out. These people are stuck. It's cold outside or it's too hot. You need air conditioning. You need light. They rely on you for food service and everything else. So in those cases, you probably want to have full facility backup. So again, it depends upon what it is. Industrial manufacturers and things like that, if the grid goes down and they don't have backup for just fire pumps and emergency lighting, is fine to get the employees out, but it ain't going to make your revenue. You're not going to manufacture anything and stuff like that. And where supply chains are these days, people want to keep, producing. So manufacturers tend to go full facility, healthcare, things that are 24/7 tend to go full facility backup.
Yeah, and speaking of that, so like manufacturing specifically, let's say I have a plastic manufacturer and they have an application that I can't even have a blip. So this particular function of my business, not the whole business, but I've got these 2 production lines, cannot have a blip. What about those scenarios where they just can't go down?
All right. So a little bit on the dirty laundry. A backup generator backs you up, meaning allows you to run when the grid goes down. It does not stop you from growing down when the grid goes down. It will bring you back up, but it's going to take maybe 2 minutes, depending upon the type of generator. It's going to take some time to come up. So you will go dark, okay? And so just so everybody understands, you will go dark. Now, there's some ways to mitigate that. Something that we do at Exergy is the vast majority, more than 75%, of outages are due to weather-related things, mostly down trees, limbs, that type of thing. We monitor weather conditions at all of our customers, and if the situation, meaning wind speed, rain, all of that, is at a point where, hey, we could have a grid outage, we'll start the generator up, prophylactically and take you off the grid. So even if the grid goes down, you don't go dark. But you can't hit 100% of the time that way. If you've got machines or operations that literally can't go down, then you need to do one of two things. And that is, you need what's called ride-through capability. A generator, even a fast diesel, will come up, like a fast diesel will come up in 6 seconds. Fast natural gas will come up in under 10 seconds. But that's still long enough for some, very fancy machine tools and stuff to break all the tools and everything else. So you need to hold them up. And the only way to really do that is with ride-through capability, which is typically batteries. Batteries get super expensive. Now, if you think about it, we'll use a different term, a UPS, uninterruptible power supply, right? So all of our computers and servers have that. We're basically talking about a UPS that will hold it up for typically a couple of minutes before the generators come all the way up to speed and things like that. But that is expensive. So if you have a sort of a full facility, you want to have a full facility backup. And you then want to add on ride through, it will double the cost of that installation. That's that expensive. So what you try and do is take the critical loads, those machines that can't go down, and you put them on a separate panel, and a separate panel will have a UPS or battery backup. If the grid goes down, only that panel will stay up. And then when the generator comes up, that panel will come and reconnect in that minute or two. If you haven't segregated those loads, which happens all the time as people expand their businesses and things like that, if they haven't segregated the loads, then you have to do point of use UPS. So you'd say this machine can't go down. Okay, I'm going to put a UPS between essentially the panel and the machine. So if the grid goes down, that machine keeps up, running that way as well. But that's the only way, and it's not a cheap solution.
Yes, it'd be very important to have somebody help get very granular in isolating the things that truly they truly cannot go down, and then what portions of the business can have a very short duration interruption, and that's acceptable. Having somebody help guide through that.
Right. It is granular, but it's not complicated. And what I mean by that is you go any production manager and say, which are the critical machines that can't go down? And they'll point them. Okay. And then you go back to the panel and you see where they are, and you'd say, I can segregate this panel or I can't. It's not difficult to forecast it, plan it, and everything else, but it is a large added expense.
Yeah. So when I have my backup power generation in place, I've got the portions that need to have ride through, everything set up. What about maintenance and keeping everything functional so that the whole reason I have it there is if there's a power outage 2 years from now in the wintertime, I'm not dark. And the last thing you want is the diesel generator is gummed up and now it doesn't kick in, or a natural gas generator is not functioning. Talk about service and maintenance, because that's a critical piece of it.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And let me start with the bad news on it. So during Superstorm Sandy, 64% of the diesel backup generators failed to operate, failed to work. And it's mostly maintenance issues. Yeah. Backup generators I'm going to say, are a little bit like airplanes. They're better to be used than not used. Now, that being said, they have certain lifetimes and how many run hours and emissions and all that kind of stuff. But you need to make sure that they're running all the time. You need to check them and test them frequently, typically minimum once a month, maybe once a week. Let them run for 15 minutes to 2 hours or something like that, so that you can identify if there are any maintenance issues, because you want to take care of those as early as you possibly can, so that when the grid goes out, you're not there with a problem. That becomes an expense. If you're running this thing every week and it's diesel's expensive. It's also dirty and all those kinds of things. But you have to do it. Natural gas, a lot cleaner, a lot easier. Now, the nice thing about a backup with demand response is that unit will be used much more frequently to make money. So you still got to test it, but you're almost testing it by making money.
Right. Yeah, by making money.
Yeah. Diesel is much more problematic. One, just because things gum up. A lot of people are unaware that, if you don't specifically ask for non-biodiesel blend, you're going to get a biodiesel blend. And if you get a biodiesel blend, that will corrode and plug the injectors. So you've got to be super, super careful. And then you've got temperature issues. If you're not keeping it warm, you have the heaters aren't running and things like that. The diesel will gel if it's really cold outside. So maintenance is key. We recommend, if you're going to do this, hire somebody who's your generator service and maintenance people and let them handle it for you. They'll come out like every quarter. They'll make sure remotely that it runs every week or every month or something like that. It's too important to rely, and I don't mean this in any negative way to anybody, it's too important to rely on your own maintenance staff who are more focused on getting your production out than keeping that generator running. Let it outsource it to the guys that really know how to do it.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, the difference in those generators, non-CHP, where you had just, traditional backup only. You've got demand response, and you've got prime power. So if I have a demand response backup generator in place or prime power, you mentioned making money and deferring the cost, because typically somebody thinks about backup generator as just a cost that I probably will never use this thing, but I have to absorb that cost anyway. How can you make money with it?
Well, we can literally look back just a couple of weeks ago when we had the terrible weather circumstances. And load went up dramatically because it was cold. People turned on their heat pumps, et cetera, et cetera. To avoid rolling blackouts, there were literally emergency messages sent to people and just said, hey, turn your thermostats down. Please do this, conserve energy and everything else. We don't literally have enough power. If the supply and demand are not matched, they're going to black you out, and it's going to be rolling blackouts. They're going to turn you off, et cetera, et cetera. To avoid that, to bring that balance between generation and load back into balance, they will pay you, the grid will pay you if you have a backup generator to literally start up and go away. And they'll say, hey, we're in trouble. And I don't mean this in any good. Hey, we're in trouble. Please start up your generator. And they'll pay you for that. So in the case of like in PJM, you can get paid about $50,000 a year per megawatt just to be, I'm going to say, on call, if you think of it that way. On call, that if the grid needs help, they call you up and they say, please start your generator and take your load off. And they'll pay you that, $50,000 for maybe 12 hours a year or even less. So that's one way of making money. The other way of making money, and it depends upon what your energy contracts are like. And let's take two examples. Let's say that you have you're on the index, meaning you're buying your power in real time. Over the course of a year, you will save about 20% by being on the index. However, you have huge risks, right? Because if the prices spike, you're paying the higher price. So in those particular cases, you sort of watch the price of the market out there and you'd say, oh, prices are high. I'm going to turn my generator and not buy from the grid. So that is what's called an economic demand response. I literally am making a decision based upon where prices are. There are two other ways. One is if my contract is what's called a block contract, meaning I've said to the supplier of the generator, I'll buy this much power from you guaranteed, right? Guaranteed for this hour, et cetera, at a certain price. Now, generators love those contracts, absolutely love it, because a generator wants to keep, running. They want to know what their load's going to be. So they'll give you a really good price for that. So let's say you're paying 5 cents a kilowatt hour for that block, but you still watch the market, and the market's now at 10 cents or something like that per kilowatt hour. And it costs you, 5 cents or 6 cents to self-generate. You go, I'm going to self-generate at 6, take that block that cost me 5, and I'm going to sell it for 10, and I'm going to make, I'm going to make the spread on that. So that again is an economic demand response. And then the most interesting one is, and this is especially in PJM, is they will pay you to go away, not only in this what's capacity, like I'll pay you $50,000 a year just to be able to call you up, is you could bid in and say, hey, today I'm willing to go away if you pay me this. Then what the grid does is it looks at what I bid in, and say I bid in 8 cents a kilowatt hour. When they're doing their optimization, and the goal of the grid is to give you reliable energy at the lowest price, they go, hey, our load is here. To get that next level of load, I'm going to have to call on this generator at 9 cents. Why don't I, pay these guys the 8 cents they're asking for to take that load off? And then they pay you that. And if you had the block, you still sell the block as well.
The block as well.
Yeah. But there's a lot of ways of making money with a generator. A lot of ways to make money with a generator. They're not easy. It takes a lot of sophistication to understand how the market works and things like that. But in some cases, the programs that you can participate in, especially when you get into things like demand management, can literally pay for the generator. You will make money every year, with that generator, and pay for the generator completely.
Yeah, so you get the best of both worlds. You get the resiliency for your business, which is why you wanted a generator to start with, and then it's not costing you that.
Yeah, that doesn't happen everywhere, right? In some cases, in some areas of the country, especially where demand charges are very, very high, you literally can have a free generator, but you have to manage it properly.
Exactly. You have to stay on top of managed properly. So looking at the problems with the grid, which are causing, those programs to exist where you can monetize your load and all that kind of stuff. And hearing the communication coming from the regional transmission organizations who are responsible for keeping the grid functional, I'm worried about next summer. So, and looking at, what's going to happen when we get midsummer next year, or, the winter, weather patterns and just the volatility of the market next winter. I want to get a generator. How long does it take from the time I say, here's the type of generator, here's the load that I need, here's exactly what I want it to do, sign on a dotted line? When am I getting a generator?
So let me give you the bad news. And then after that, I'll give you the worst news. Okay. So the bad news is supply chains have hit generators really hard. Demand is up considerably just because of all the grid outages and things. Yeah. So you're looking at, if you decided to go now, it's probably 10 months to over a year until that would be in there, commissioned and everything else. It depends a little bit on the size of the generator and things like that, but the supply chains are bad. So if you wanted to do something now for this summer, not happening. You would be lucky to have something for next winter. So that's the bad news. The worst news is the grid's just going to get worse. So if you look at the forecasts out there, they're forecasting increased outages, blackouts, and things for 2024, 2025. As we're transitioning the grid is aging, it's getting less stable and all the things. We're really not on top of, fixing the grid and things like that. So when I say, can't help you in the summer, even hard helping you for the winter, it's don't wait, however. Get an order in, get it done now, or else you're going to be facing an even worse circumstance going forward.
Yeah, if the congestion, keeps going, it'll just push out further. Yeah. So with that being the case, what other options do I have other than ordering new? Can I rent? Can I buy a used one? Because I imagine there's probably a strong market for that. What other options do I have?
It's a little bit the same. The supply chain has hit everything. It's a little bit like used cars, right? They were in such in demand and they got very expensive. Rentals, sure, but those are almost impossible to get as well, because it's a first come, first serve. And when a hurricane hits or tornadoes hit, they're going to ship those generators wherever they're needed most. So if you want to make sure that you have a generator available for you if you need it, you basically have to pay for it and have it sit at the rental place or something. And you're going to pay almost as much on a yearly basis just to have that generator sit there.
Well, and that's hoping you have a reputable vendor who will honor the agreement that they made with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many people looking for it. So if you, we were just talking to a rental agency the other day. People say, if you want one, I can't help you. Literally, I can't help you. Everything I've got is either spoken for or is already out somewhere else. So then that brings you to the used market. The used market has gotten pretty robust as well because people are trying to find generators. You got to be very careful. And let's go back to generators for a second. So you got, backup only, demand response, et cetera, et cetera. Generators have a lifetime to them with regard to the number of run hours. You can run them for a certain amount of time, and then they're going to need a top end, a head rebuild, and things like that. So if you're going to go for the used one, you want something that's very low hours, preferably something that has been really well inspected, possibly warranted by a generator expert. But the other problem with used generators, generators sit around for a long time. That's a good thing, but parts become really hard to get. So it's not uncommon for a generator manufacturer to say, we'll guarantee part availability for 7 years or 10 years. And you say, oh, that's great. Well, you bought a 5-year-old generator. Okay, maybe low hours, but it's still a 5-year-old generator. 3 years from now, 4 years from now, you may find it's really hard to get parts. And what you'll see in the maintenance of generators is the maintenance cost is very, very reasonable until you hit that part availability problem. And then it gets very, very expensive. So recommendation.
And I'm sure the legislation on the environmental impact of generators is not getting any kinder or less restrictive. And when you talk about older generators, I'm sure that ends up becoming a factor as well.
To some extent, depending upon what you want to do with it. Okay. Yeah. And what I mean by that is the government wants to make sure that people live. So during an emergency, you can run that generator. They're not really going to care too much about the emissions. It's when you use that generator for something else, like demand response and things like that, it's extremely tight. Most generators today are called Tier 4 final, which have very low emissions, et cetera, et cetera. But if you go to a used generator, even though it may be demand response capable, meaning has the number, the run hour capability and things like that, it may not meet the emissions anymore. Yeah. And adding emission control to it is not going to be warranted by the manufacturer, not going to be warranted by whoever it is that you have doing that work. So you're going to have to do air testing and things like that. It gets to be a nightmare. So if you're looking at used, I would look only at the aspect of a backup, not a backup plus demand response in that circumstance.
So after this conversation, I understand each of the components of it, and there are a lot of them. So, and going into the acquisition of a backup generator, there's so many factors that you might not think about on the front end that you have to consider. How your energy is being purchased, what type of financial agreements do you have for your energy, what participation programs are in your area, which ones can you handle, who's doing my maintenance. So with all of these components, what is the best way to do this? I want to run my business. I make widgets. I want to be the most effective widget maker, and I want to beat the guy down the street who's competing for the same customer. I don't want to handle this stuff. What's the best way to make sure I'm covered?
No, that's a great question. So if what you're trying to achieve is very simple and very ring fence, all I need is my fire pumps, my exit lights, and all that kind of stuff. Just go get an electrical contractor, come in, put in a backup generator for that. Grid goes down, that comes on, you go home. That's just go do it, right? If you're interested in getting the best value possible, and when I say value, that's both economic and peace of mind and not wanting to pull your hair out. We recommend going with somebody like Exergy or somebody who will take responsibility, do all the analysis, get the right size, service it, maintain it, participate on your behalf in all the grid services to reduce that cost, and essentially purchase your backup power as a service rather than a CapEx expense. And I go back to it, is a backup generator in general, in the hands of just you as the business owner, is just an insurance policy. And it's an expensive insurance policy. Now, one thing about energy is it's incredibly cheap when it's there, and it's infinitely expensive if you don't have it. But it is still an insurance policy. And you have better things to do with your capital than buying an insurance policy. So yeah, if I go down and I can't supply my customers and everything else, there's a pain to that. But that capital being used to bring new products, expand my sales force, expand my market, is going to pay me back a lot more than buying a backup generator. So what we do in our business is we own the backup generator. We maintain it on your site. You don't pay any upfront cost whatsoever. We participate in all the grid programs that are available. That's how we make our money. And then we share those savings with you as well. At the end of the term, you get the backup generator, and we'll continue to manage it for you and things like that. But save your capital for what is best for your business. And I'm going to say outsource your resiliency and as well your sustainability and getting the right energy contracts, type of energy, green or whatever, to get you the best deal possible. Outsource that to experts. That's our opinion anyway.
Yeah. So I as a business owner, I can have my business resilient. I can have somebody manage the power for me. And then by them doing that, they can recoup finances that'll help me cover the cost of my backup power, which is what I was trying to do in the first place, without it costing me time and energy.
Also think about it from the perspective of labor.
Yeah.
Everybody's having trouble finding people, et cetera, et cetera. So you want them, we have a labor shortage. You want the labor you have focused on your business, what generates the most value. Your maintenance people have got to be focused on your production equipment and things like that. You don't want them spending time worrying about a backup generator and everything else, of which they have very limited expertise. Outsource that to the experts that's all they do. They'll be 10 times more efficient and effective than you're going to be. And your people are applied at the right place at the right time.
This has been very informative, and I'm sure our audience will get a lot of value out of this. So thanks again for the time, Dave. And then we will make sure that this is stored. You go to Exergy Energy, our LinkedIn page, and you'll find that the content
under videos on the LinkedIn page will be under videos. Yeah. Or go to our website. It'll be in the blogs.
ExergyEnergy.com in the blog section. And then any further questions, again, reach out to us via LinkedIn or our website, and we'll be happy to address those. So thanks again for your time, Dave.
Thanks, Randall. Great to see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.